All right, thanks to everyone who held on for a moment here. We're going to start the WebEx. Welcome to Lexsynergy's monthly webinar series on new domain names. My name is Matt Buckland, Sales and Marketing Manager with Lexsynergy. As most of you know, Lexsynergy specializes in domain name management and brand protection, recovering wanted domain names, and taking down websites that infringe upon copyright. I'd like to introduce our CEO, Daniel Greenberg, who will be presenting today. Daniel founded Lexsynergy in 2007. He has over 15 years experience in IP law in the UK and South Africa as a solicitor and associate. His professional writings have been published in the Journal of Intellectual Property Law and Practice, and he co-authored a leading cyber law textbook in South Africa. Daniel is an admitted South African attorney and an admitted solicitor of England and Wales, both non-practicing. Today our webinar will focus on the mechanisms available to brand holders for protecting their marks in the new domain name space. Now, we understand that not everyone has the same level of knowledge about the domain name industry. For those of you well-versed in the terms, some information will be pretty rudimentary. For those of you not as well-versed, the acronyms might be a bit confusing, but don't worry, we'll answer any questions you have at the end. Also, if anyone has any issues with the connection for the webinar, please send me a quick email to matt.buckland, matt.buckland, @lexsynergy.com, and I'll look into it immediately. And now, Daniel Greenberg.
Great. Thank you, Matt. I'd like to welcome all the attendees to the first of our monthly webinars covering new GTLDs and other aspects affecting domain name registrants and trademark owners. Feel free to ask questions during the webinar via the chat function on WebEx. I have muted some of the participants, so you won't have audio there, but we will be checking the chat room for questions. The approach of this webinar is taken from a trademark perspective. The reason for this is that domainers are well versed in the domain name industry and know what to look for and are not really affected by the trappings that trademark owners are faced with as they battle the launch of these new GTLDs. The domain name industry, as Matt said, is listed with acronyms, so I'll do my best to explain each one as we go along. Most often, webinars start off with the question of what is a domain name? By now, it's widely known that a domain name makes navigating the web easy, in that you have an easy-to-remember name rather than a long series of numbers. In a simplified way, it can be compared to storing a telephone number on your mobile phone. When you want to call a friend, you search for their unique name on your contact list instead of the number. Although domain names have a technical application, they become much more than that. They are brand identifiers, creating a pseudo form of intellectual property, namely an online trademark. Many trademark attorneys would argue that domain names are not part of intellectual property, but they do form a very important role. With the online environment essential to our daily lives, domain names are the beacons that allow you to set up your home for your business online. With all the good things that the internet brings, there is a downside in that a slight misspelling of a domain name or an identical registration in a different extension could divert customers and potential customers to other sources that may seek to profit from the confusion. Also, by now, you've probably heard of this type of confusion, either in the form of cyber squatting, where someone registers an identical match to your domain. For instance, instead of someone going to Lexsynergy.com, another person would register Lexsynergy.co and lead them to competitors or to an affiliate paid parking page. And typo squatting, the act of registering misspellings. So it would be Lexsynergy with, instead of a Y at the end, IE, directing users to another page. So now that I've briefly set that scene, it is within this landscape that trademark owners have been battling with infringers. If a trademark owner wants to recover a domain name, they would, depending on the extension, use the UDRP, which stands for the Uniform Domain Name Dispute Resolution Policy, to recover these infringing domain names. The process and what needs to be proved is reserved for another webinar, but what is relevant here now is that there is a battle or an uphill battle in that domain names are relatively cheap to register, with the recovery costs for a trademark owner substantially higher. A filing fee in a UDRP complaint is approximately $1,300, depending where you file it, and that's excluding the fees if you go through the route of instructing an attorney to draft that particular complaint. So now new generic top-level domain names have come along. As you can see, all the nice little images that are popping up on the screen right now. So they were introduced towards the end of 2013, introducing extensions such as .guru, .club, .london, .nyc, and .company. The idea behind these new GTLDs was to give the internet community greater choice beyond the traditional .com, .net, and other country codes such as .co.uk, .de, and say .co.za. So today there are approximately 400 new GTLDs that have been introduced, creating a wider scope for infringements, targeting trademark owners. So the aim of this webinar is not to frighten trademark owners, but to acknowledge the scope of the challenge and implement a strategy that can mitigate the risk. The other day, a potential client asked me how much it would cost to block someone registering their trademark in all GTLDs, as well as confusingly similar variations. Unfortunately, I had to break the news to them that there's no such broad blocking service, and if there was, it would probably be unaffordable, and we as a corporate registrar and other brand protection companies would be out of business. So there isn't a catch-all scenario. So before we delve into new GTLDs and the best action plan in dealing with them, let's look at some statistics. These statistics were obtained from ntldstats.com, as most of you probably visit them if you are in the domain name industry following the numbers. So within a year, over 3 million domain names have been registered across approximately 400 TLDs. The largest single one is .xyz with approximately 680,000. The next is .berlin with 153,000. A number of the .berlin domain names were given away for free during a promotion, so that's why the number is quite high. After a couple of days, or I think it was a couple of days after the promotion, they ended it early just because so many people were registering the domain names in that particular TLD. Third is .club with approximately 128,000, followed by .realtor and .wang with approximately 80,000. .wang is pinyin for the word web. Pinyin, for those that don't know, is a phonetic system for transcribing Mandarin pronunciation of Chinese characters into the Latin alphabet. So that's proven to be quite popular. .guru is at position number 6 with approximately 750,000. .ovh is a branded TLD belonging to the host provider OVH, and that's sitting at 53,000. Position 8 is held by .london, which I think has just changed, followed by .nyc, which has overtaken it, which I read today. .nyc is a restricted TLD in that only local businesses and individuals based in New York can register that TLD, so it's actually proven to be quite popular within the New York region. This particular TLD prohibits proxy services, for those of you that are interested in that. This basically prevents a person from providing a local presence service to overcome the eligibility criteria that has been imposed by the particular registry. And then position 10 is reserved for .link with 44,000. What is interesting to note here is that 3 city or geo-TLDs appear in the top 10. And I believe as the new GTLD program develops, these geo-TLDs will grow in popularity in the respective communities as those seek to gain a presence in the localized area. So, for example, if you operate a restaurant in London, you would want to register restaurant.london or your restaurant name.london. Users would then know that they are searching locally for a London-based business, and the same goes for rentbicycles.london and similar types of services. Other more niche TLDs such as .lawyer and .attorney, which are restricted to those professions, will have relevance, but I think will maintain a modest number of registrations due to the TLDs being industry-specific. Those two combined have approximately 11,000 registrations to date. So that is the number crunching. So enough of that. Let's jump into the new GTLD program. From my experience, many trademark owners and trademark attorneys are overwhelmed by the sheer number of TLDs that are launching. The different launch phases that are being implemented, the protection and enforcement mechanisms that are available to mitigate the risk of infringement. So today, we won't deal with the mechanisms available where an infringement is identified and the remedies that can be sought. We'll reserve that, as I said, for another webinar. What we will deal with today is the strategy and the steps that can be taken to limit the trademark exposure to infringements. So without getting into the technicalities and politics behind the domain name industry, it's worth mentioning that there was a lot of debate back and forth of what could be done to protect trademark owners in the new GTLD program while balancing the interests of the general internet community, which in my opinion is never an easy task. What we have today is a compromise. So in my client example a few moments ago, you cannot block all forms of infringement, and there's no catch-all approach. The nature of domain names being their first-come, first-served registration process means that they will be abused and infringements will take place. The real question is, what proactive steps have you taken, as opposed to the attitude which I see often in this industry, where clients say to me, you can't prevent infringements, so it's not worth doing anything. Well, I use the example of a farmer with 1 or 2 or 10 or 100 locusts eating his crops. It's not so serious, but not treating his crops beforehand means that if a swarm comes along, he may lose it all, as you can see by our fancy graphic. And that's what we are faced with today. All the locusts with domain name squatters. So I'm not scaring you, but it's the most graphic example I could think of. So the starting point is to identify which trademarks you want to protect during the new GTLD launch. This decision is normally more relevant to businesses that have a fair number of trademarks. If you have 1 or 2, then there's no question. In order to simplify the process, as you can see, we prepared a visual depiction of the best route to take to protect your trademark. So we've prepared this flow chart, and it's got fancy colors there. The route that we will focus on is the blue route, and that is the route that most trademark owners should take. So the first step is the validation process. Now, the validation process involves validating your trademark with the Trademark Clearinghouse, or as they call it, the TMCH. You can validate a mark directly with the TMCH or via an agent such as ourselves. The trademark has to be registered in order to submit it to the TMCH. So this means trademark applications cannot be submitted. Then, during the submission, you have to submit some documents. What are these? Firstly, you need a trademark registration certificate. If your trademark is registered in a jurisdiction which has an online searchable database, the certificate is not required, as the TMCH would source this information from the relevant database. The same applies with the renewal certificate. If the trademark has been renewed since the registration, you would need to supply that. If it has been renewed in a jurisdiction that has an online searchable database, then that's not necessary. Then you need to attach documentary proof of use. This proof of use must match the mark. Normally a screenshot from the trademark owner's website will be sufficient. Incidentally, a domain name registration is not sufficient for proof of use, as well as a business card that has been set by the TMCH, so I'm not too sure what the reasons are, but that is the case. Also, some trademark owners have a stylized mark. This means a mark that is laid out in a specific format, maybe with an image or a certain font. The proof of use has to match the way the mark has been filed. Many trademark owners don't do this, and it results in the mark being rejected. So a trademark can contain an image, as long as it has numbers and letters that can be reproduced in a domain name, and they must be rewritten in the order in which they appear. So I will just jump ahead to the ICANN examples, the ones that ICANN give us. And that's, for example, if your mark is ICANN example, because it has a space in it, you cannot reproduce a space in a domain name. It's replaced with a hyphen, or the space is omitted to form one word. The same where it's ICANN hyphen example, that has a hyphen, so it would remain as is. Special characters like the ampersand, as you can see in example.test, is omitted, replaced with a hyphen, or written out as and it depends on where the trademark is filed. If it's filed in a jurisdiction where there is another language, say the example over there in Canada, you can use et, which is the and in French, as a variation of the mark. Also, you cannot combine two different types of script, so English and, say, Japanese at the bottom for Deloitte won't be accepted. Now, the two pictures at the top have an image or a device in them. So in this case, you could submit this to the TMCH, but the label, which they call it, which you list in your TMCH submission, which is the variations of your mark that you would like to secure, you would have to reproduce them in that order. So it would be ICANN accredited registrar. So that means if that's validated, you'd have to register ICANN accredited registrar.guru or whatever extension you choose. And the same goes for ICANN, it would be ICANN. So you couldn't then apply for accredited registrar ICANN .club, for example. So that's the labels that you would select that would form part of your submission to the TMCH. Another form of documentary requirement, should I say, is a signed declaration. This is signed by the trademark owner stating that the information that they've provided is correct and that they have in fact used the particular trademark. So once the mark is validated, it has two effects. The first is it allows you to participate in the sunrise period of each launch of each new GTLD, obviously subject to the eligibility requirements of restricted and semi-restricted TLDs. But in short, what the sunrise is it's a priority period reserved for trademark owners who have validated trademark rights with the TMCH to apply for a matching domain name before it's open to the general public. So if I've submitted the trademark Lexsynergy, actually our mark is one word, but for the purposes of this example, I've separated them. What we would then do is we'd choose the labels Lexsynergy as one word because we have the space in our mark, and Lexsynergy Lex Synergy as the other. So in this particular case, I could then apply for two domain names or two variations when the sunrise launches. So as I said, each new GTLD will have its own sunrise, and it's very important that you do validate marks, because if there's no validation, there's no sunrise. You cannot participate in the sunrise. If there are two or more applications that are submitted during the sunrise, then it goes through to an auction, and normally through an auction. Some registrars have different procedures, but generally it would go through to auction. So the next slide is a brief summary of the process. As I've said, you have your registered trademark. You then go through the clearinghouse or a clearinghouse agent. You can have your mark validated for 1, 3, or 5 years. We normally recommend that you go for the 3-year option. It's most economical at the moment, and you do have the option of renewing it when it does expire. Then once the mark is validated, after you have submitted all the documents which I previously mentioned, the TMCH will give you an SMD file, which is a type of code, encrypted code, and in layman's terms, and this code is then given to your ICANN accredited registrar, who then processes the sunrise application and then hopefully secures it for you at the end of the sunrise. So it's very important to make sure that you do follow the blue route, as I've stated. The black route after the sunrise, which shows 2 or more applications, and the auction route. If you win the auction, then your domain name is secured, so there's no issue. If you lose, then there's no registration. And it would be very difficult, if not impossible, I think, to recover it through any other mechanism, since the other party does have a validated right to this particular TLD. Another benefit or effect of the TMCH is that it affords a claims notification service to the trademark owner. This alerts the trademark owner when a third party registers a matching domain name. So, for example, if I've validated Lexsynergy, I would be notified if someone registers Lexsynergy.com, but I would not be notified if a person registers Lexsynergy with a .ie at the end instead of a Y. Then also, there's an obligation on ICANN accredited registrars to make sure that the claims notification appears during the registration procedure. So when a third party is registering a domain name that matches a mark that has been submitted to the TMCH, they will receive a notice, as you can see on the presentation. It would list the trademark owner's information and give a bit of a preamble about it. They would then have to check it. We've taken this from our system. And then once they've checked it, they would then go through the registration. So in fact, that particular person has been placed on notice, and they are aware of it, so they can't claim, like in the past with many disputes, that they weren't aware that it matched a trademark or that they were infringing upon a trademark. The next system that's noteworthy, which many Europeans and people outside of Africa are not aware of, is the Mark Validation System, or MVS. This validation system was introduced by the applicants of .Africa, .Durban, .Joburg, and .Cape Town, the ZACR, and it's similar to the TMCH with the exception that you can validate common law trademarks or unregistered trademarks such as a trading name or company name. The idea behind the MVS was to give the African community the opportunity to have a priority in securing domain names where they weren't able to secure a matching trademark, for instance, because of cost limitations and infrastructure issues on the African continent. But what must be borne in mind with this MVS is that the TMCH does have priority over the MVS, but at least it does give people that have common law marks the opportunity to secure these domain names in these TLDs. Incidentally, .Joburg, Cape Town, and Durban are entering the GA stage tomorrow. That's general availability, where it will be available for all to register. .Africa, there have been some issues with the allocation of that, but when it does launch, in our opinion, it's going to be one of the biggest TLDs, just because it covers such a large region and it is difficult to register domain names in Africa. So it's worthwhile advising clients to validate marks via the TMCH or MVS, and the MVS is substantially cheaper. It's a fraction of the cost of a TMCH submission. Very briefly, looking at the priority levels of the MVS, they've ranked trademark rights into various rankings. So the first is ranking 1. This is where there's a validated mark from Africa that will have priority over a mark which is ranked number 2, which is a mark from a country outside of Africa. Then the third priority level is unregistered marks in Africa, then unregistered trademarks outside of Africa. So if you have a company name that you've been using for many years but don't have a trademark, you can still validate that and enter the priority ranking number 4. And then after that, it's released to the general public, bearing in mind that the TMCH does trump the MVS. So say where there are 2 marks from Africa, we'd assume that the TMCH would have priority over the MVS submission. The next is issue that needs to be addressed is, or not issue, rather solution, is the DPML, the Domains Protected Marks List. And this particular service was introduced by Donuts and RightSide, 2 registries that have collectively applied for approximately a third of all new GTLDs that will be launched. And this is a type of blocking service. Sorry, I'm just getting some feedback. So if your mic's on, if you can mute that. Okay, so as I said, the DPML is a blocking service, and what this entails is for a fixed fee per string, you can block a particular mark. So, for instance, in the examples that you see, the mark Yahoo, once it's submitted to the TMCH, which is a requirement, you need a validated mark for that, you can block Yahoo across all the extensions that form part of the DPML. It's also noteworthy to mention that you can include other strings, but you would have to pay a separate fee, and it's a separate block for additional strings or labels, and the mark has to appear in the block that you are seeking to register. So, for example, Apple does appear in that particular one. IBM services cannot be registered. There is a restriction in certain three-character domains and less cannot be blocked, as well as premium domain names cannot be blocked. Also, the Verizon, depending where you come from and how you pronounce it, the Verizon market has a 1 in it, so obviously it doesn't match the mark, so that cannot be blocked. The Amex example can be because Amex appears in the mark, and United Parcels service cannot be blocked just because it has 2 S's, as you can see, that is highlighted in bold. So that cannot be blocked. But this does go a long way in assisting trademark owners in protecting their trademarks. The reason being is that you can save a substantial amount of money in that the cost per TLD is a fraction than if you had to go and register the particular domain names individually. So you may not want a .restaurant domain name, but since it is included in the block, you do gain from that benefit. So it will block across approximately 200 TLDs. There may be more. There will be added, and I'm sure we can get clarity from Donuts on that, but they're adding new extensions all the time, as well as right side. What must be remembered is that that the service is really intended to block squatters, not trademark owners. So if you have a validated trademark matching a block, so say if I have Lexsynergy and I've blocked Lexsynergy and another person has a trademark for Lexsynergy in, say, Brazil, they can pay an override fee per domain name and override that and register it. So if you have a mark that has a descriptive element to it, we would advise that you do override the block if you have put the block in place. So say if your mark is momentum, it is generic, or it could be a premium, so maybe you can't block it, it's advisable to rather register that. It must also be remembered that a block domain names are non-functional, so they won't work, they won't resolve. Also, they won't appear in the WHOIS record. And like I said, it's 95% cheaper. So a lot of our clients have opted, trademark clients have opted for the DPML, which has reduced our registration numbers, but has benefited clients in that they've made substantial savings there. We've also recently been informed that Minds and Machines will be launching a similar service to this. So as registry operators introduce blocking services, we would advise clients to take the opportunity to block their particular marks in those particular services. So just coming back to the flow chart, as you can see on the left-hand side where it's highlighted in red and green, those particular avenues and processes is when you don't validate your mark. And as you can see, it's more cumbersome. There is a higher risk in that you may not be able to secure your particular domain name if you have not validated your mark through the clearinghouse and gone through the correct channels. So the land rush, you could be subject to an auction, which could make the domain name very expensive. And the GA stage, obviously a lot of domainers are out there trying to register valuable domain names, so they may incorporate your mark, and then you may have to file a UDRP or a URS complaint, which is very expensive, well, relatively expensive. although it's marketed as a cheap service, if you have multiple domain names that are affected, it can escalate costs. So therefore, the trademark route is the best one to follow. What we've also done is prepared a flow chart, and this is set out in priority of importance according to us. Some of you may disagree, may want to change the order around, but essentially it serves as a template or a default strategy on how to tackle these new TLDs when you have a trademark portfolio. So for instance, if you have a country trademark, such as a trademark registered in the UK, you would want to secure .uk and all your country codes, which is almost a default approach now. The same as the regional. If you have a community trademark, which is a trademark that covers the European Union, you'd want to make sure that you've secured your particular domain name in all those regional TLDs, such as .eu, .asia, .africa. Then we enter the next level, which is the traditional TLDs, and that's ComNet, Mobi, and org. Those are the TLDs that were launched prior to this whole new GTLD program. The next level, point 3, we feel is one of the most important steps that's involved in this whole process, especially because community TLDs cover areas, geographical locations, and groups of people. Now, we've called them community TLDs because in some cases it does cover community, not just a city. So for instance, .kiwi for New Zealand is one, .bzh for Brittany in France. Now what happens is if you have a trademark and you have registered your trademark in the European Union, and what that gives you is trademark protection in each EU member state, then it makes sense that you go after and register your trademark .Brussels, .Hamburg, .Paris, .Scot. Even if you have a trademark in the UK, you'd want to secure .Scot, .London, .Wales, .Cymru, which is Wales in Welsh. And it's very important because if you don't and you do have to recover it, it is an unnecessary expense. Now, what we're saying is not going after every possible variation. That does not make sense. But at least the identical match of your primary trademark or your primary domain name should be registered in those particular reasons. For some reason, we've received feedback from clients, and some of them have decided not to go the route of community TLDs. So it remains to be seen what the effect of that would be. You know, if someone does have a common law right, let's say in London, to, I don't know, for example, McDonald's. Maybe his surname is McDonald's and he operates a travel agency, McDonald's Travel, and then he registers McDonald's.London. That would be a difficult issue a difficult domain name to recover. The next is new generic TLDs, and in this category we include very generic domains that can apply across various sectors, such as .global, .website, .enterprise, .business, and these should be registered just because of their broad scope. Then we go on to step 5, is the industry-specific TLDs. This is .restaurant, cruises, toys, and really relevant to your particular industry. So for us, it would be .email, .domains, maybe .host. Those should also be secured. Also, the next step is looking at defensive TLDs or defensive registrations. This is number 6. This is, you know, domain name or domain name extensions that you would not necessarily want associated with your brand. And this is, we once again recommend that it is an identical match and not going crazy and registering all possible variations. The most important, I would say, out of these is the review, .review, .gripe, .reviews, the plural. The adult-related ones, obviously, if you are, once again, McDonald's, and someone goes onto McDonald's say adult or porn when it's released, they will know that that's not McDonald's. But when it comes to reviews, if someone has an identical match to your mark and is reviewing it, it could cause some issues, especially with the aspect of freedom of speech in various jurisdictions around the world. So it's very important that at least that attention has been paid to that. Then IDNs, which is internationalized domain names or non-Latin script domains. sorry, I am going through this quite quickly, so if there are questions afterwards, you can raise those. Non-Latin scripts are very important because you may trade across borders and you may want to give effect to your mark in a foreign language so that the local market can understand it. So it happens with some of these IDNs is that the entire domain name has to be an IDN. So for instance, for .Moscow or .Shabaka, the particular TLD has to be written in Russian or in Arabic. So that's the entire domain. You cannot mix English Latin script with the IDN extension. However, there is an exception, and those are the Chinese extensions and the Japanese, in that they do recognize the Latin script. In China, as I said before, there's the Pinyin alphabet, which is the Latin alphabet, where Chinese characters are transcribed into with Latin script. So it's very important that you do secure that as well. So you could secure Lexsynergy dot and say Chinese website and whatever that particular IDN is during the registration process, just to make sure that you've secured it in that region. Unfortunately, China is known to have a lot of infringements, so we would advise clients to register in that particular area. And also because of the potential as well. You want people in that local market that are searching for your brand to be able to identify it as a domain name. So that was essentially a quick run through within our allotted time to explain the strategy and processes involved in protecting your mark. And we hope that it has been useful. If you have any questions, you can email Matt or myself. My email address is daniel@lexsynergy.com, or you can raise any in the chat room now, should you wish to do so. If there aren't any questions at the moment, I can actually, I'm going to turn on the mic, so if you want to raise your question over the phone, you can do that. Okay, so since they're okay, great. So since there no questions that I can see, you can email any questions to us directly, but I'd like to thank you for your time today.
Yes, thank you very much. And again, we will send out a notification in the next couple of weeks. This is going to be a monthly webinar series. And so if you have any suggestions or any requests for content for our next meeting, you can send those to me. You can send those to our support team. My email address again, matt.buckland@lexsynergy.com, and our support team at simply support@lexsynergy.com. Thanks again for attending, and have a good day.